Well, hey, good morning. Happy New Year's. Thank you. You guys said it back. I didn't expect it. I don't know. I was just like moving right along. I'm so glad to be worshiping with you guys today and getting to dive into God's word. Guys, we did it. We made it through 2022. It's on the books behind us. And so for some of you guys, this is a time of year where you are like energized by the possibilities of a blank slate. You're thinking, what could be in 2023? You've got like your goals planned out. You're thinking, I'm finally gonna kick that habit and I'm gonna get that promotion and I'm gonna fix that relationship and I'm gonna get in shape. Maybe you're even thinking, I think this is a year I'm gonna get closer to God. And so for you, you're energized by it. You're those like motivated, ambitious, maybe a little type A kinds of people. And for you, I mean, this is one of the best times of year. I think actually this past week, my 8-year-old Silas told me that he wanted to be president. That was the first, and I have no idea why. He said that his 4 sisters were gonna be his cabinet. So I'm gonna strongly discourage that path, but if he goes that way, I mean, I can't stop him. He's driven. Maybe for you though, as you're thinking about what could be in 2023, it causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure, because you're afraid of what might happen. Or maybe for you, you're like, man, I just don't feel like I can hang on to that weight, that I can bear up under it. Because, I mean, I gotta be more, I gotta do more, I gotta hope that this is the best year ever. I'm just barely hanging on as it is. Well, the good news for both of us is that God invites us to a journey where we are on a journey up and to the right. Up and to the right, where we are seeing consistent spiritual progress throughout our life. Our life is not a snapshot or just a moment. It's not just about what we decide right now about our resolutions and our goals, but it's about this progression up and to the right. And so to start off this sermon series, we're talking about rest. And a lot of you are like, yes, actually, Nathan, that is my New Year's resolution, is that this year I'm gonna sleep more. And you very well might need it, but that's not exactly the kind of rest we're talking about, although it can very much be related. We're talking about a kind of spiritual, mental, emotional, like soul-satisfying rest, refreshing, calm, that sense that everything's gonna be okay. And that can feel like a little bit of a weird spot to start for a sermon series on like how do we make real progress in our spiritual life. It can feel weird, like, hang on, if we're talking about growth, why are we talking about rest? Aren't those kind of like opposites? And though it feels like it at the beginning, you know that that's not really true. I'm thinking of a recent example. So if any of you were teaching your kids how to drive on ice, in the past couple of weeks, you know that if you're like starting to skid on ice, your temptation is gonna be to tense up and pump the brakes, but instead you gotta relax and steer into the skid. If you play sports, you know that in the heat of the moment, whenever you're pressured to hit that shot, you're gonna wanna tense up to try to make it. But what you actually have to do is relax. I play guitar, and so for me, I spent a lot of time in a family room, like practicing scales and just like hitting the metronome, trying to bump it up just a couple more beats per minute to get a little bit faster. And I would hit a point where it's just like my forearm's burning and I'm just trying to tense up and get just a couple more beats per minute out of my arm. But what I had to actually do was learn to relax. So we know it's true in a lot of things in life, and it's true for our spiritual life as well. And so believe me, whether you're thinking about like everything that could happen in a positive way in 2023, or you're feeling anxious, today's message, this invitation from Jesus, is for you, and we want to hear it. Now, there's several aspects of this that are a little bit counterintuitive. And so for all you note takers, I'm just gonna let you in on the roadmap of where we're going today. First piece that's counterintuitive is who Jesus invites. The second counterintuitive piece is what he invites them to do. And third, it's who Jesus is. So let's dive in. Would you go ahead and grab your Bible or your Bible app and let's turn to Matthew 11 together. And as you're turning, let me get you up to speed on the context of this passage. So we spent a lot of time during our Advent series in the book of Matthew, and Matthew was one of Jesus' followers. He's just like dead set on showing us how Jesus is the promised Messiah, the one who was spoken of to come. And we finished off our series by talking about John the Baptist, who said, I have to decrease so that Jesus' ministry, his prominence, can increase. And so since that time, we've seen just Jesus is traveling around, he's doing miracles, he's giving teachings, and people are responding in very different ways to him. So some people are like hopeful, but still very confused because the things that they expect of him just aren't really lining up. Other people are like really not about this. They're like, hey, Jesus is trying to take our power away, or we don't like the way he's behaving. He definitely is not the Messiah. And then other people are just kind of apathetic. They're like, we really like the miracles he does, so we'll follow him around to see what the miracles are like, but really we don't want to change anything about our lives. And so it's into that context that this passage speaks. Jesus has a crowd around him, and he does this. It says, at that time, Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. So Jesus is praying in public. This is not just him talking to God, but he's praying loudly in front of a crowd, and he's letting them in on the fact that he has a really close, special relationship with his Father. And then he's praising his Father for his counterintuitive methods of revelation. Like, who does God choose to reveal himself to? And he says, man, Father, this is amazing what you choose to do. And I would summarize it with these two kinds of people. He says, it's amazing that you hide it from the wise, that they don't get it, but that you reveal it to little children. Now, whenever we say that he hides it from the wise, we got to be a little bit careful because the Bible in general talks very positively about wisdom. As you look through, it's all kinds of commands to pursue wisdom and understanding. And so it can be a little bit confusing, but we can understand what kind of wisdom he's telling us that we shouldn't be after whenever we see what he contrasts it with. So he compares it specifically to not this, but be like little children. Now, I have a little bit of experience with little kids. I have a family of 5 kids, Silas, Abby, Ellie, Olivia, and Lily. Last service, I actually forgot one of my kids' names. It's like, that's a terrible feeling. I'm sorry if you ever watch this video, Ellie. I do love you, I promise. And so I just think about like little kids, and so my Lily, my 7-month-old, she's just starting to crawl, and whenever I walk in after a day of work, she just lights up. She smiles, and it's like the biggest smile I've ever seen in my life. It's like just like her whole face smiles, and it doesn't matter what I've been through that day, like whether it was a difficult day, it just like melts away whenever I see it. It's so sweet. Olivia, man, she has figured out something that I don't know, I definitely never figured out. There's something that she's figured out about how to get her way that just blows my mind. So we'll be sitting around and she'll be like, hey, Dad, can we watch Phineas and Ferb or Yes? Right? Right? It's a classic like heads I win, tails you lose situation. I'm like, this is genius. How did you come up with this? You're 3. But man, it works. It works. Ellie, my 4-year-old, she has just recently started to fall in love with what she calls patrons. So she sees like alternating colors or numbers, and she's like, Dad, look, it's a patron. So whenever we're driving around looking at Christmas lights and she sees stuff, she's like, look, Dad, it's a patron. And it's adorable because her little world is just expanding, and she's starting to notice things in a different way. And so whenever I think of like, what is this that Jesus is really saying about like God hiding things from the wise and understanding, but revealing it to kids, it helps to think about what are some characteristics of little children. First thing I think about is that kids are dependent, and they know it. They're dependent on their parents. They can't just like go off and start their own life. They need their parents, and they're not embarrassed by it. The second thing would be that they're constantly learning and growing. Lily has no problem with the fact that she can't walk yet. She's not embarrassed by it. She's perfectly fine because she's learning and growing. And so she's just started crawling, and then she's going to start walking. And it's like at every phase, she's just loving the fact that she's learning. I also think about the simple faith that our kids have, that whenever they ask me a question and I respond with an answer, they're not just like, you have to explain down to every detail. At this early age, they're just like, okay, Dad. And I just love that simple trust. So seeing that helps us understand, like, what is it whenever he says that God hides himself from the wise and understanding? We see he's saying that the people who are self-assured, that they think that they can be independent, that have no desire to learn and grow, but they just feel arrogant and self-assured. He's like, those kind of people don't get it. It's the people who come like little kids. And this is a common theme throughout Scripture. It's kind of God's pattern. It's that he chooses to reveal himself to the humble, but he opposes the proud. I think of David being a young man whenever God comes to him and invites him to slay Goliath. I think about the shepherds at Jesus' birth. I think about Jesus himself saying, let the little kids come to me. We see that this is how God operates. And a powerful illustration of this in pop culture that Parker reminded us of this week was in the movie Avatar with all the blue people. He said, Parker reminded us of a moment where Moat looks at Jake Sully and says, it is hard to fill a cup that is already full. It's hard to fill a cup that's already full. To which Jake Sully replies, my cup is empty. And that's the kind of person God reveals himself to. People who don't think they have it figured out, people who don't think they have their act together or that they know everything, but who come and say, Jesus, my cup is empty. And Jesus continues this invitation. He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. Now, these two words, labor and heavy laden, are closely related, but a little bit different. So labor has to do with these self-imposed restrictions or weights that you've put on yourself. So that kind of expectations you have for yourself. What do you think you should be like? How do you think you should perform? That life goal and relationship goal and career goal and like spiritual goals. It's like those things that we heap on ourselves and we expect ourselves to just nail it every time. I'm like a textbook perfectionist with this kind of stuff. So it's like, if I've had a conversation with you and I walk away and feel like I said something wrong, I'm just gonna replay it over and over and over again in my head. Does anybody else do that? Cool, thank you. I don't wanna feel alone in this, or I'm gonna replay that over and over and over in my head. Oh, I'm just gonna sit there this afternoon and like, nobody else does that? And it's like, man, I have such a high standard for myself that it makes it really difficult to like be okay whenever I mess something up. Whenever he says heavy laden, this has to do with burdens that other people put on us. And so for them, they would have naturally associated that with the burdens that the Pharisees put on them. Jesus said, and a little bit later, he said that these Pharisees, they heap up heavy burdens on people's shoulders that they can't even begin to bear. But the Pharisees themselves don't even want to lift a finger to help with that burden. And so whenever he talks about this, it's just important, it's helpful to know that like in the Old Testament, there were 613 commands that God gave. And the Pharisees said, that's not enough. And so they created a couple thousand more to surround those laws, to give further clarity and nuance to say, well, okay, an example of this is like the Sabbath law. Whenever God says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And the Pharisees said, that's not specific enough. So they came up with 39 more laws about how much work can you do on the Sabbath? How far can you walk before it's in violation? And then they would heap these weights on the people. So whenever this crowd that's around Jesus heard, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, they're thinking about the burdens that they've placed on themselves. They're thinking about the weight that their religious leaders placed on them, and they're feeling it. That exhaustion that comes. And man, I identify with that. I think it plays into my spiritual life too whenever I'm thinking about this, because I don't know if anybody else deals with this, but a lot of times I feel like if I have not spent enough time praying, if I've not spent enough time reading my Bible, then I feel like God really doesn't want to be with me. He's saying, hey, Nathan, come back whenever you got it a little bit more together. If you really wanted time with me, then you would have put in the hard work to do the reading. So let me know whenever you're ready. And I can feel like that. And so if you're like me, maybe you've lived with this idea that you need to get your life straightened out and that you need to like figure out the details or you need to be doing better before you come to God. And that's the crazy thing, is that that's not at all what Jesus wants. It's not at all what he wants. What he's saying here is not only is it okay to admit that you don't have it all together, it's actually a prerequisite to coming to him. The people who think they have it together, they miss it. But the people who say, Jesus, I have an empty cup, those are the ones who get it. The way we like to phrase it around here is that God welcomes us just as we are. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, Jesus extends an invitation to you. It's not the wise and the understanding or the perfect and put together, but it's the empty and tired. That's who Jesus invites. And that brings us to the second counterintuitive aspect of Jesus' invitation. And that's what he invites us to do. He says it this way in verse 28. He says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." Rest. Refreshing, calm, peace. That sense that everything's going to be okay. Do this for me. Take a really deep breath. Let it out. You feel that? That little taste of rest? Jesus says, "Come to me," and you can experience this deep, profound rest. And then he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Now, a yoke is not something we see every day around here. A yoke was a heavy wooden beam that would go across the shoulders of a farm animal, and it would have ropes attached to it so that they could pull a farm implement, that they would strain against it and pull and pull and pull and do the hard work that it took to plow a field or carry a wagon, pull a wagon. And for Jesus' followers, they would have not assumed that he was talking about a literal wooden beam that he was going to put on their shoulders, but they would have assumed that he was talking about his teaching, like what it meant, what he expected of his followers. And then when he talks about his burden, he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." And this "learn from me" would have had the same root as the word disciple. So learners, followers. And so whenever we read this, we're kind of tempted to say, like, now, hang on, Jesus, you just promised rest, but this sure sounds like you're saying, "Come to me and I'm going to give you hard work and a lot of education." It's like, well, that doesn't sound like rest at all. But thankfully, he goes on to say, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Hear that. Yoke is easy, burden is light. And these phrases are almost like oxymorons. Like those don't sound like they belong together. It's like he's saying that his yoke isn't really a yoke at all. It's a non-yoke. His burden is a non-burden. And then we have to ask, like, hang on, how can Jesus say that? Is he like lessening what God expects? Does he have a really low bar for righteousness? Is he saying, you know what? Nobody's perfect. Just give it your best shot and it'll be okay. And that's not at all what he's saying. So how can he say it? I want to talk about two ways that he can say this. Two reasons. The first is that Jesus himself did the heavy lifting. So whenever I think about that yoke, that heavy wooden beam, I can't help but think of Jesus, who would walk up Calvary's hill carrying a wooden cross on his shoulders to die a death that you and I deserved because of our sin, because we could not uphold the righteous standard of God. And so Jesus did the heavy lifting in being obedient in our place and then dying in our place. So he can offer an easy yoke. He can offer a light burden because he's carried it for us. The second reason he can do this is because he knows that obedience to God is where real life is found. 1 John 5:3 says that the love of God is this, that we obey his commands, and his commands are not burdensome. See, God designed our world. He made us, and he set it up to work in a certain way where we can experience life to the full. So whenever he gives us his commands, it's for our good because this is the way life works best. You want to know what life really feels like? What life to the full is like? Then live in the way that God designed it because it's better than anything else you've ever experienced. So whenever Jesus says, you can take my yoke because it's easy, my burden because it's light, it's because he knows that this is where we find real life. It's like he's saying, hey, would you carry this helium balloon for me? It's a burden that gives extra lift, that you actually feel lighter as you're carrying it. It's like he's saying to a drowning man, hey, put on the burden of a life preserver. That's what's going to save his life. And so whenever he invites us to put on his yoke and his burden, it's not like, okay, that's where the punchline is. Wear this heavy weight. It's Jesus saying, I'm going to give you real life. So around here we say it like this, that God welcomes us just as we are, and he loves us too much to leave us there. And you know this, if you really love someone, you want what's best for them, even whenever it's uncomfortable. So there are going to be things that Jesus asks us to do that are really like not comfortable for us. Situations he asks us to go through that are difficult, trials. But we can know that it's for our good and it's the best thing for us. And sometimes he's going to ask us to have difficult conversations with people that we love, to confront an attitude or a behavior because it's what's best for them. Because we love them, we enter into that discomfort, even whenever it comes at great personal cost to us. And so Jesus invites us to take up this life-giving yoke, which brings me to the third aspect of his invitation that's really counterintuitive, and it's who Jesus really is. There's a quote from A.W. Tozer that I just really love. It says, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." And here's why he says that. Because all of us have this conception of God, of who he is, of what he's like, of how he responds to us, how he interacts with us. And that shapes the way we behave. It shapes the way I think about my life and what I'm picturing whenever I come to him, whether it's in worship or in repentance, whether it's moments of learning about him. And the problem is that we naturally form a God that's a lot like us or people around us. So if we would react harshly in a situation, we think God would react harshly in that situation. If we're impatient, we think God's impatient. If that authority figure was demanding, then we think that God is demanding and waiting for us to get it together. And it's so important because that shapes the way we interact with him. And so Jesus takes a moment right now to just shatter the way we think about God. He says, "For I am gentle and lowly in heart." And whenever he's talking about his heart, he's not just talking about his emotions and what he feels. For them, whenever they talked about heart, it would be the very center of a person's being, that thing that drives them. And so he says, not, "My heart is that I am perfect and demanding," but that I am gentle and lowly. And what's so interesting is this is actually the only time in all of the Gospels that Jesus said, "This is my heart," where he says, "Let me peel back the curtain and show you what I'm like at my core." So gentle and lowly, that means that he's never harsh, that he is kind. It means that he's a servant and humble. That word lowly can even mean destitute, like utter poverty, someone that you would kind of cast to the side and not give any regard. If this concept is something for you that you're like, wow, I want to press into that. What does that really mean? There's a book from this year that I read this year that was probably my favorite book I read, called Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland, and it just unpacks this truth. And he says it this way: Jesus is not trigger happy, not harsh, reactionary, or easily exasperated. He is the most understanding person in the universe. The posture most natural to him, get this, is not pointed finger, but open arms. For anyone who had come to Jesus with a humble heart, with an empty cup, it's not pointed fingers, but open arms. And that challenges us because our expectation is that the more perfect a person is, the more they're repulsed by the dirty and grimy things of the world. The more powerful they are, the less likely they are to associate with the poor and the lowly. And Jesus says, that's not who I am. It's not who I am. I'm gentle and lowly. And we see this throughout his ministry, that he consistently gravitates toward people's suffering, toward their mess, not away from it. This perspective shift of who Jesus is so helpful for me in specifically two regards. The The first one is how Jesus deals with us when we are suffering, or there's something going on in our life. And I just want to share with you a little bit. So I encountered Jesus' dealings with people who are suffering in a different way this year than I had before. And I haven't talked about this publicly very much at all. So I've had something with my health going on this year. Back in March, there was a Tuesday morning that I woke up and my right eye basically was not working. There was a big dark spot in the middle of it that I couldn't see anything in it, and it freaked me out. I thought maybe it would get better, but it didn't, and so I went to an optometrist, and they thought it was one thing, but then I got a second opinion at the advice of my family doctor, and went to Barnes Jewish, and the neurologist looked at it, he said, I think it's optic neuritis, like inflammation of your optic nerve. And he said, but we're going to need to do an MRI. So a few days later, I'm sitting out there in our cafe, and I got a phone call, and the doctor was on the other end of the line, and he said, hey, so the MRI confirmed it's optic neuritis. Also, we saw a lot of lesions on your brain, and we're highly concerned that it might be multiple sclerosis. And so I went and did a lot more testing and stuff, and the doctors confirmed that I do have MS. And for me, I didn't really know a whole lot about it. I didn't know what that meant. And so MS is, it's an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks your nervous system, and it kind of eats away the insulation around your nerves so that they can short out and cause things like what happened with my eye. And it's so, like, you can wake up and like what happened with my eye, I couldn't see of it, and I've slowly regained about 80% of my vision in my eye, and that's probably about what I will get back. And that's kind of how the disease works. So you might also wake up and not be able to walk or not be able to talk. And so my brain just started racing. My first questions were like, what's this do to my life expectancy? Am I going to be able to see my kids grow up and get married and be a grandpa? Then I wondered, is it genetic? Did I pass it on to my kids? Then I wondered, what about quality of life? Because anytime I would look up stuff about it, the pictures I saw were people in wheelchairs and assisted living homes, and just like, God, I'm 32. This is not how I thought this was going to go. And what I experienced in the middle of that was the tender love of Jesus. That he came to me, and while I still had questions and fears and anxiety, I felt him embracing me and saying, it's going to be okay, and I've got this. And I experienced that our Savior truly is gentle and lowly. He does care about us whenever we're suffering. And I don't have the answers for why he's allowed this to happen in a specific way. I know in general he uses this to make us like him, but I don't know the specifics of why he's allowed it. But I can tell you where he's at in the middle of suffering. And it's right next to his kids. So by God's grace, I've also found out since then that there's really never been a better time to be alive and have MS, because there are fantastic treatments. I actually will be starting one tomorrow. I didn't start it this week because I wasn't sure what the side effects were going to be like, and I needed to preach this message. So the prognosis is actually pretty good. There's a 90 to 95% success rate with this medication in preventing relapses, those things that happen. I have a great team of doctors. I have great friends and church family surrounding me. So that's all fantastic news. A lot of you have experienced suffering in your life that I can't even imagine. That you've lost loved ones that were dear to your heart. That you've had relationships that ended. that you've lost careers, that you've lost everything. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because 2023 is going to have more suffering in it. There's going to be stuff that you don't see coming in your life or in other people's lives. And I can't tell you the specifics of what God is up to in those situations. But I can tell you where he's at in the middle of it. That he's right there, not with a pointed finger, not waiting for you to get it together, but with open arms, ready to embrace you and hold you and give you that soul-satisfying rest. The other question that Jesus' character of being gentle and lowly brings up for me is, how does Jesus deal with us whenever we sin? Because that's self-inflicted suffering. That's stuff that we kind of brought on ourselves, right? It's like surely at that point, Jesus is pointing his fingers and saying, man, I thought you were going to do better this time, but you blew it. Surely he's waiting for us to like stop that repetitive sin, stop that habit, get our act together. But no, Jesus is not sometimes gentle and lowly toward his kids. He's always gentle and lowly. So I think about like parenting with this. I think about whenever one of my kids gets hurt, even if they were doing something dumb, even if they were doing something that I told them not to do and they're directly disobeying me, whenever they get hurt, I don't stand back and say, told you so. I run to them and scoop them up, and I want to make sure they're okay, and I want to clean them up. And sure, there's going to be a moment where I say, you probably should have rethought that. But that's not my heart for them. And even that comes out of a place of love. And so if that's what I'm like as a dad, if that's what good parents in the room are like, Jesus is even better. And so whenever we sin, even whenever our suffering is self-inflicted, he runs to us, not away from us, and he welcomes us with open arms. So I want to close with this. The invitation from Jesus, I would summarize with these 4 phrases. What he invites us to do is to humble ourselves. To say, God, I don't have this figured out. I don't have the energy and the motivation to do the next things. My cup is empty. I need you, Jesus. And to come to him, knowing that he's gentle and lowly and that he's not standing with fingers pointed, but outstretched arms, inviting you in, saying, come here, come here. And to find rest, that thing we so deeply long for, that relief, that refreshing, that sense that he's got this. And then to repeat it. Because life with Jesus is a journey up and to the right. And you'll notice that that's intentionally not a straight line, but it's a line that has some peaks and some valleys in it. Because that's the reality of the Christian life, is that you're going to continue struggling with sin until you go home to be with Jesus. You're going to continue having suffering in your world. And Jesus invites us to do this, not just once, but all the time, to humble ourselves, to come to him, and to find rest. So you want to experience a year like none that you've had in the past? You want to experience God's best for you? Whenever you struggle with sin, whenever you blew it again, humble yourself. Come to Jesus and find rest. Whenever that relationship is ending or you're in the middle of conflict, come to Jesus, find rest. Whenever you don't know how to parent your kids, humble yourself, come to Jesus and find rest. This is what the Christian life is all about. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for showing yourself to us today in your word, because this just blows our minds that this is what you're like. we so naturally want to think that you are standing far off, waiting for us to get it together. So God, we right now come with empty cups, saying, Jesus, give us rest. Rest from all of the expectations we've heaped on ourselves. Rest from expectations that have been placed on us by others. God, we just can't do it. And we're tired of trying to hold it together and pretend that we can. So Jesus, we come to you. We ask for rest. God, for those of us in the room that's a struggle for us, that we're actually in a spot of saying, feeling like we've got it together, we invite conviction from the Holy Spirit, because God, you love us too much to leave us where we're at. So God, reveal to us even the sin in our lives that shows us how much our cups are empty, that shows us how much we're not what we need to be. Today, for people in this room who are suffering things that I can't imagine, God, I ask that they'd experience that you are a gentle and lowly God who meets us right in the middle of our suffering and gives rest. I ask for that today. Meet us and speak to us in Jesus' name. Amen.